Hey, we're back.
We
Welcome
are.
to another recording with Paul
Oof.
and Brandon, or Brantron, whichever one works best. We're
Yeah, I
back
noticed that.
again.
Do you have a new name every week?
Yeah, I don't know. What was it last week? I can't remember.
Maybe Brando or something?
I think it was Dorf. I think it was Brandorf.
Brandorf. Yeah, that's what it was.
Like
Sounds like a small
like
German town in the
yeah.
Alps. Oh, did you visit Brandorf?
Brandorf, we're famous for serving our schnitzels
And skiing.
and skiing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds good. I want to go visit Brandorf. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
probably
sure it's
nice
a
people
wonderful
there.
little town. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always decorated like Christmas.
Uh,
Uh,
and the
and
Grinch
there's,
lives up on a hill. Anyway,
yeah, and they serve gingerbread upon entering the borders. Um, so
man, the
we were just,
creative juices are flowing. We just created a whole city.
yeah,
Created
yeah.
a-
And it's not even in Germany, it's in Canada. You can go visit tomorrow. Um, no.
oh man,
Yeah, we were just talking about our weeks, just kind of catching up before this, and
yeah.
so we're gonna just dive right in. I've been sharing some ideas that I think we should just make everyone wait till the second half.
Are you
And
sure?
so,
I was gonna say you should go first because I felt like
yeah,
with creating Brandon Brandorf, I
yeah,
don't know. I
we're
feel
already in
like
the
your
creative
ideas.
mindset.
I feel like it's already fresh. I think you
Yeah.
should go.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. At some point, this podcast is gonna have to be turned into like or called the struggling creative or something. At least for my half, because
The starving
every
artist,
the start. Yeah, there you go. Because everything seems to kind of just revolve back to creativity or imagination or some sort of
Lord of the Rings.
yeah, why I can or can't write for the week. uh, this is my confessions here on
Yeah,
recorded down for everybody to hear.
yeah. Partially confessions, partially therapy sessions, partially.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. I mean, that's all
Uh,
podcasting is, right? It's like
that's
therapy for
right.
the modern age.
That's
You
right.
think Joe Rogan's not hasn't gotten some demons off his chest,
That's
admitted some things over his podcast.
I know, right?
Yeah. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, so mine is I always want to think of like a catchy phrasing for it, to like sum it all up
okay.
in a sentence or like two words or whatever. But um I think my inspiration has to do more with imagination and kind of
Mm,
like how you get to a state of imagination or how you um, can foster that
mm,
and what that kind of looks like in a practical way for daily living or just creating stuff for yourself. Um, Kind of what I was telling Brandon earlier was how um, for me there's almost a certain balance of like take the more you take in, and this is just purely my case, the more I take in, the more or it can sometimes like scratch that creative itch without actually doing anything creative. And so I get like this, and it's not as fulfilling, it's like it's much more fulfilling for me personally to actually go out and do the thing or create or make something or whatever, but it's actually like that's kind of work in some sense, so there's a bit of resistance there. But like taking in creative stuff, and so ultimately that work is worth it, and it's like that's what I want to chase. But sometimes taking in the creative stuff almost like fulfills that role without actually putting in the work or whatever, and makes for maybe a bit of complacency or something, or something else that you can kind of substitute for the real thing. And there's obviously a lot of analogies in every area of life, whether it's junk food substituting for real food, and you never feel as good, but it's easier in the moment. But for me, I've just noticed that like specifically with reading and like fantasy or sci-fi, like sometimes I can get into the mindset where it's like uh that's filling where my imagination would go, and I don't have time to just like sit and let my own imagination go and wander and stuff. And yeah, do you have times where you notice your imagination peaking or dipping based on what you do?
yeah, I definitely feel that um, if I can just completely empty my mind, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that I do this a lot when I travel
You're a
because
tad
you'll just
quiet,
be, oh yeah, I'll come closer.
just a
So
tad.
I think that I do this more when I travel because if you can really empty your mind and you have sort of that solitude where nothing's distracting you, and it's just like, well, what am I going to do on this airplane for like 10 hours, staring out the window, napping on and off.
By hour
That's when,
7, you start to get pretty creative.
yeah, that's right. By hour 7, it's like I have entertained myself by, playing with this weird zipper hanging about, I mean, whatever it is, it's like you find some way to like do something with yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel that when you get to that place, even though it's like a little bit of torture to get there, it's a little bit of like suffering. When you get to this point that you've sort of emptied your brain and nothing is consuming, you've worked through all the problems, there's no logistical stuff to stress out about, whatever. You've just sort of like given into the fact that you're at a moment of life where you are bored and there's nothing to do. And there's no like easy entertainment to reward yourself with, then I feel like when you get to that place, and it could be a plane, it could be a train, car rides, sitting at home alone, going on walks, whatever it is.
Power goes out, Wi-Fi's down. Power
goes out, right? Whatever. I feel that when you get to that place, suddenly you become really creative. And whether it's like an artistic narrative, writing a story, or even if it's something like creatively solving a problem you have in life.
Yeah,
how am I going to make my budget work? Yeah, a business idea, something at work, whatever it is. You find a solution to something. Your brain gets to a place that it hadn't been before. And I think you finally like relax your brain enough to solve a problem. Yeah, the floodgates open, Yeah. So I guess I would think for you, what is it that you feel like, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier before we started recording, but what is it that you feel like maybe gets in the way of you being creative? When you're trying to get to that space of like
imagination,
creative flow, imagination,
Yeah.
What's the obstacles for you that stops you from getting to that place?
I need to write down a question because I thought that was a good point you brought up.
Because my monologue was so boring that you got to a place of creativity that made you think of the question.
It only took 45 seconds instead of 7 hours.
That's the power of me talking.
I was going to say it's because you're so inspiring and sparked 1,000 other ideas. But no, I think I kind of think of it like maybe like a computer where you have like RAM, you have a certain amount of RAM, and if it's already filled up with something else, you have to empty it out before you can put something else in. So in that scenario, it's like by taking in other media and like having maybe, because I think there's two different types of like consuming. Like there's things that are very inspiring and very like, actually, this sparks another. I'm gonna go on a little tangent first.
Go for it.
I was thinking about Tolkien today, and so like there's certain like books you'll read or stuff you'll see where it's like you'll see a lot of the author in the book, and you'll see like a lot of like maybe like one of the characters you're like for instance, I'm reading a book right now and I'm like the main character like falls into this like specific situation, whatever, and you're like, I know the author has been through this exact same scenario because he's describing it with way too much detail and way too much like specific, thing for this otherwise like innocuous detail in the book, It's like clearly something the author has been through or struggled with or like, had real life experience with that he's like processing in his book. And it's like, when I read Tolkien, like or even like C.S. Lewis to some extent, like I don't feel like I know the author like on any personal level, if that makes sense. Like that might bump some people out, or maybe there's other ways to relate to that. But like I feel like I might know their worldview a little bit and like where they're coming from worldview wise. But like them as a person, like I wouldn't, like if you had to say like which character would Tolkien identify with the most, it's like maybe a Hobbit or something. Who knows, but like, it's not like the characters are necessarily, they're like so varied and all that it's like, it's hard to read into a person into any of that, Um, and so, like, to tie that back to my previous before the tangent, like, there's different works, and I think like some are more, I don't want to say empty, but they're not infused with the creator's um like their own personal like philo- philosophizing, or like their own agenda, or their own whatever it is. Like, it's more like they're channeling something, so maybe like some deeper truths or some inspiration, like or I guess in this case imagination, like they're channeling the imagination without trying to like put a bunch of themselves in. Some of it will be there just naturally, but I think a lot of like the good works are really channeling that like they're just a conduit to get this thing that exists into the world, and like I think you hear that from a lot of creative people, like they're almost reaching outside themselves to get something, rather than like trying to really make a point, or write something that people will remember forever, because then you get into trouble, I think. So I think with those two types of work, so now to tie that back to the original thing, like the two works are, I think there's stuff that's that more open-ended stuff that's like leaves room for you to be inspired, I guess, and like it leaves room for you to be like, there's room in the work for you to insert your own imagination, and it's kind of like participatory, versus stuff that's more just like kind of mundane, that's on the nose, that's that's like kind of like trying to fill your head with something else, and it's much more, it's not as inspiring, it's just kind of filler to like, just like noise or filler or something, versus something that's like open and expansive, invites you in and actually sparks your imagination. Because I don't think like these, Lord of the Rings or whatever would have been nearly as successful if they weren't as like, you see like fan creations, it's like at this point fans have made more content about Lord of the Rings and with Lord of the Rings than the actual like author has, like hundreds of thousands of times over. People have played card games with it, people have played board games with it, people have played D&D campaigns with it, like people have messed with this space way more than the author has even been in it, or spent devoted time to. So so I think that's the big difference for me when I get what might block me is when I'm reading something that's more straightforward without that invitation to imagination in it, and so yeah, that's the long way of answering that question.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. I mean, I know that authors will take stories or circumstances from their own life and then project it into a story. And when they tell a story, they're sometimes in part telling their own sort of memoir, or they're telling, like if Tolkien had written a story that was about, a fantasy world, but the main character was like a college professor. It's like, well, Tolkien was a college professor. So it's like, okay, so you're writing about yourself just in like fantasy world. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And he was the coolest professor and the best person. And
yeah, but it really is, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, to reimagine the real world, just overlaid into like a different sort of parallel universe.
Is that just technically allegory at that point?
But yeah, see, that's the interesting thing that you bring up is like, what's the level of creativity that's involved? Like Tolkien created an entirely new world, and it wasn't just like a replica of the current world, and I almost see it as like three different ways of world building. There's almost like making the world that's like a shadow reflection of your world, your personal story, whatever. You could maybe make something that's kind of a fantasy thing that has symbols that relate to your world, like the Wizard of Oz or different things like that. There's some symbolism that comes back to the real world. And then I could also see it where, like what Tolkien did, where it's like, this is a completely new thing that I just imagined that does not point back to my life or the real world in any large degree, you know?
To be fair, I mean, he did draw a lot on like fairy tales and mythology. So there is, I think he was heavily inspired too. So it didn't come out of nowhere, but like, I see what you're saying. Yeah. About doing something that no one's really done before, and yeah, trailblazing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you get a sense of, hopefully this rain's not too bad. It's starting to really pick up.
I know I hear it a little bit, but I think it's okay.
Okay. It might get, we'll see about this podcast, how it turns out in 10 minutes, but, do you feel like you get a sense of maybe like J.R.R. Tolkien or C.S. Lewis from their writing of like maybe how they live their life, or like, or maybe not how they live their life, but personality stuff about them?
I think you could maybe pick up more from C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis, I think, put more of his personality and his worldview into his writing, especially with the Space Trilogy, knowing that the main character, Ransom, is kind of symbolic of C.S. Lewis a little bit. But for Tolkien, like if I didn't know anything about Tolkien, who he was, his name, his life, anything like that, and I read Lord of the Rings, I don't think I would have any way to guess what kind of person Tolkien was.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like
be able to pick up he was a college professor.
Yeah, like, I don't think I would get that conclusion. I feel like I would just be clueless. Like, I don't know who this guy is, but I like his stuff. I don't know.
He could be someone's grandpa, just like writing a book, you know, or whatever. He could be. Yeah. Huh. Yeah. So for me, like, I think to kind of get back to the imagination thing, it's like when you cut out. So for me, cutting out the filler stuff, like I like the inspiration stuff, and I think it's hard to find that though. Stuff that's like, you know, leave space for you to engage with your own imagination and stuff. Like I don't think that's very common in the world. So for me, like I tend to be selective with what I read, but then when I'm reading something that's more just filler, like that actually occupies some of my imagination space. And it's like, for whatever reason, I'm not as imaginative when I'm reading like a kind of more average fictional series. And I don't know why that is necessarily. Maybe it's just like, yeah, I don't know. But I don't know, when you read, I mean, do you read a lot of fiction?
I would say I'm reading more fiction now than I ever have before. I probably read like 75% nonfiction, 25% fiction.
Okay.
I'd probably read like one fiction book a month. I'd say about that much.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Is it hard to like find good stuff that like resonates with you or like sparks your imagination?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that there's a lot of fiction stories that are semi good out there, but it's hard to find something that I really want to be like, oh, I'm just glued to this and I'm going to just consume it like crazy. I actually find, it's kind of a weird thing. I actually find that I have a hard time beginning a fiction story if I don't know anything about the story. Like, I have to either start it halfway through, or I've got to kind of read some spoilers, or I've got to like watch the movie beforehand. Because if I just read a fiction, like fiction takes a lot of like character building, world building, and usually in those first like 10 chapters or whatever, while they're just building stuff, it's like, okay,
this town and this is this people and this is the language they speak. And
you're it's like I'm already bored out of my mind and I'm not interested anymore. So I'm just going to put this book down. But then people are like, oh, you really should have gotten like all the way through because it was really great. And it's like,
you'd only made it 75% of the way in, you would have been so stoked. And you're like, well, I didn't want to read 300 pages.
It's like I have to have something to kind of hold on to as a nugget that's like, okay, if I keep reading to the end, it'll be worth it. Like, stick with it, Brandon, you know?
You need a hook, yeah. That's true. Yeah, I mean, there is some series that just like kind of grip you from page one, but those are very rare.
Yeah.
Like, very, very rare, I'd say. Yeah, so I guess for me, like, so to dial even more in on the imagination, like for me when I'm free of like those distractions or whatever, or like like things just kind of entering that taking up that imagination space, it's like all my ideas start to like kind of start, like you said, when you're, after 7 hours or whatever, it's like they start to tumble out, and it's like, then you become the fountain for that creativity or something that like you want to see in the world, which is what I think is like super cool, where your imagination starts to like just run wild. And um like when it runs organically, it's like such a cool process, because then it does fall into that first category, I would say, where it's, you're more so channeling something than um trying to force something, which is always my favorite, because then like the way I've written and stuff, or try to write, is like I want to just write the story, like the story that's like, I just want to write the story I want to read, which is I think what most like successful, I guess maybe not successful in that sense, but like authors that have done something that they're proud of, it's like I didn't see what I wanted in the world, so I went out and made it, or whatever kind of thing. And so I think being able to like see that kind of stuff. So for me, like taking the time to clear the distractions, to let the imagination run, has been like a really inspiring thing to me, because it's just like in my story, it's I don't know, like it works until it doesn't, kind of, unfortunately, because you'll get like super inspired and then you hit a wall, and you're like, it works this way in life too, which is kind of a odd parallel, but you'll like be inspired, and then all of a sudden you'll get to like a crossroads, I guess. And maybe it's just a personality type thing or whatever, but you get to a crossroads where you're like, to use the writing example first, it's like, well, what does this character do? It's like, do they do this or do they do that? And you're, at least for me, I get stuck there, and I'm like, I don't know which one's right, and I think that happens a lot to people in life too, where it's like, you feel like you got the answers, you feel like you're confident in where you're going, where you're headed, and all of a sudden you get to this crossroads where you're like, oh shoot, and then it's like it all comes crumbling down at that moment. You gotta like kind of be like, well, I don't know which one's right, and you don't want to make a mistake, and there's this idea that you're going to mess things up forever or something. I'm not sure what the fear is exactly, that if you write your character in the wrong way, that it can't be changed, like that's some how it is forever. If you make a decision in life, that's how it is forever, which is kind of a weird fallacy, but nonetheless powerful one. But yeah, so then you gotta somehow get back to a state of emptying that worry, and then going back to like the wonder and the joy of like just creating, making, and like letting the story unravel, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some parallel to that in life as well. But the question I wanted to ask you was, so when we talked about, so the idea is flowing after like 7 hours, do you think, and you're kind of getting like new inspiration or new insight into things, do you think those ideas were always there and just clouded over? Or do you think those are being like, for lack of a better word, beamed in from somewhere else outside yourself?
Ooh, yeah. Like, were they locked up in my brain and I unlocked them, or did they not exist until I generated them?
Or you were like silent long enough to receive?
To receive them? Ooh, who am I receiving it from? Am I receiving it from God or my inner my inner man?
Yeah, maybe it could be God.
Gosh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Whatever the answer is says a lot about a person, what they believe on a bigger picture.
I mean,
so answer carefully.
No, I think that sometimes you can have, it's almost, I'm going to bring it back to playing Legos here. Okay. I feel like you can put all the Lego pieces down on the floor and you've got everything you need to build the Millennium Falcon, whatever it is that you're trying to build,
Yeah. I was literally
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, Star Wars and Legos, they kind of go hand in hand. There's a lot of Star Wars Legos out there. Good way to make lots of money off of cheap plastic. Anyway, but you've got everything there to like do the Millennium Falcon, and you can just stare at it long enough and try to like figure it out and try to work on it and whatever, or you can open the box, you can like pull out the instructions, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when it comes to thinking through ideas, it's like you have all the resources in your brain to think of something original. You just need to actually give yourself the space to like sit down, stop running, and eventually you're going to pull out the instructions and read it, and the solution is right there. So I feel like you have it in your brain, you just haven't connected it. And I mean, I don't know exactly the physiology behind this, but I would almost imagine that it's like there are certain synapses in your brain that just haven't connected yet. And you're just sort of like waiting for those synapses to connect. And maybe you need to like relax your brain in order for those connections to be made. But I feel like that's kind of that's how it feels, at least just personally, when I suddenly hit an idea. It's like, oh yeah, duh, it was right in front of me the whole time. Like, it's so obvious now, like that's the way I have to fix that problem, duh, you know. And I feel like I had the resources in my brain. I just needed to like unlock it more. So I may be a little bit more on that side of the equation. Not to say that you couldn't get something divinely from God or that it couldn't come from an outside source, but I feel like a lot of times when I'm in that space of 7 hours waiting and I get into this flow of thinking, that's kind of how it feels to me. So does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense. Yeah. So does the way you're getting so the next question is, how are you getting pieces? Is it, is a piece, do you get a piece when you have like a life experience or something, or like you learn something, or how do you get those pieces?
Oh, like how do we get the Lego pieces to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just accumulated by, whatever you're trying to do. Like if you're doing a story, then it's like you make the decision, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to write a narrative, fiction. And so then you start, working on a creative project. You're creating the pieces. Like you created those, you get 100,000 pages into creating your story, and suddenly you realize, oh shoot, I didn't make this character the way I wanted, and it doesn't work, and there's a big plot hole, and why didn't they just fly to Mordor? Whatever. And we've already filled those gaps in, so people have explained it.
There's like half-hour videos of like,
oh yeah,
defending Tolkien why that wouldn't work or something.
Oh yeah, I know, and I've watched several of those. Anyway, but you're confronted with a problem. So like the Lego pieces, you created those pieces by whatever you're trying to do. I mean, that's the example of a creative project you're doing in life, but maybe it's something in work. It's like, well, you're the person who went out and got this job, and now you're working, and now you've got an issue in a relationship or a work problem, whatever it is. You created those Lego pieces and put them on the floor. And now you have the resources where you need to just stare at them and figure it out. Okay, how am I going to put these together?
Okay. That answers my question.
Yeah.
It gives me some stuff to think about. I like Lego analogies. Always clicks in my brain, pun intended.
Oh, it clicks. Yeah, that's the thing with Legos. It always fits together. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just going to hurt your fingers and your fingernails when you take it apart.
Yeah. Everyone's all wimpy and uses stud removers or whatever.
Is that what people use today?
Yeah, remember those random like little orange things you would get in boxes and no one knew what they were for when you were younger?
No, I don't remember those.
Dude, yeah, you can scrape up tiles with them. Like there's ones that don't have any studs on them. You can, use them to disconnect like the 1/3 size bricks or whatever from each other.
Man, I feel like I don't even know what those are. I'm going to have to look those up later. All I remember is just growing my thumbnails out really long.
Exactly.
And then every once in a while breaking it.
Yeah, I never wanted to use flat pieces because they were so hard to get off. Or use like the small ones because they were just like, you knew you were never going to get it out if you put like 2x2s on there like that were super small.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
Well, that's together forever now.
Yeah.
Nice. So what did you want to talk about, man?
Well,
to Brandtron's brain.
Yeah, it's similar to Jeff Bridges' brain, Tron, bro. We're inside the computer now. Yeah. So okay, well, I have a different concept to talk about.
Nice. Love me some concepts.
I decided that I think it's really inspiring how we can measure so many things. Just the idea of measurement, I think, is kind of a fascinating concept. you can measure so many different things. I mean, you can measure, your height. Oh, you're this tall. You could measure your weight. You could measure
My amount of
time.
attention.
You can measure your attention. You could measure, liquid volumes. I mean, there's so much stuff, but I think it's interesting how much of our lives are dependent on measuring things. How many pages are in this book? How much money do I have in my bank account? How much, whatever it is. I feel like every day we're living in a world with measurements, and when
How
you
far
think
is it to the
about,
bus stop?
yeah, how far is it to drive to this place? How much time will it take? How much gas do I have in my car? Like, so much of our life is based off of measurements, and we make decisions based off of measurements. And I just think about how there used to be a time in life when people couldn't measure things as accurately. We didn't have clocks once upon a time.
Yeah.
You did not know the exact time of the day. It was
Get
like,
close.
yeah, you get close. It was like, well, the shadow's this long, so that's how long it is.
About 3 inches of shadow o'clock.
Yeah, or I mean, I suppose you could measure like money, or I mean, even before we started using like gold coins or things like that, it's like, what's the value of all my goats versus your goats? It's like, well, I've got 10 goats, you've got 10 goats, but my 10 goats look a little healthier than yours. Like, I mean, it's all kind of these inexact ways of measuring stuff, And it's just interesting how precise and how obsessive we've become with measuring in our culture. And I guess the things that really inspire me is how when you start measuring stuff in your life, you can really start changing things, and how you can actually measure things. I think you can measure more things in life than maybe you even imagine you can, like you can measure your emotions, you could measure your like thoughts by journaling or trying to talk about it out loud with people, or
isn't there like a saying, like a measure of character, or like a measure of something? And is that a biblical saying?
I don't know.
It's like by the measure you it's probably what that was. Like, I think Jesus said, like, by the measure you use for others, so it'll be like measured into you, or something like
I
that.
said something like that. Yeah.
But I think maybe there was a different, I don't know.
Yeah.
Something.
But
now I can just look it up.
Yeah, now just go look it up, man. There you go. We're measuring your words right now.
Going. Measuring what?
Oh, I said we're measuring your words right now. Anyway, but it's interesting. Like, measurements can be used not only for precision and for decision making, but you can measure things as like a way to record stuff and look back on it later. You can measure things as a way to just become aware of something. Oh gosh, I didn't realize. I looked through my journal entries, and like every day I complain about this thing in my journal at the end of the day. Like, I guess that's a problem in my life, whatever it is. But even measurements are like, it's just used in so many different parts of the world and in parts of culture and life. It's an iconic thing in the idea of justice, like you see somebody holding up weights, that are like both being measured against each other. And it's like making sure that the measures are accurate, because that's being fair and not cheating somebody their money at the merchant's office when you buy, 10 pounds of whatever cheese. I don't know. And so
the verses from like all the New Testament where Jesus says, "Judge not that you not be judged, for with judgment you pronounce, or for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you."
Oh, there you go.
And so, like you were saying, like the justice and like and then even, like the old Egyptian, whatever God used, or like the pronouncement of the dead, they would weigh like the person's heart against a feather, and then like decide whether that crocodile gets to eat them or not, their soul.
That's right. That was Egypt, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's right. What was the thing in Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Remember, they measured the woman against like a duck, and it was like, if she's a duck, then like, and then it was like
witches are made out of wood, so because they burn, or they burn because they're made out of wood.
That's
what
right.
Floats in water? He's like, stones, really small pebbles. He's like, wood.
He's like, also
a duck.
A duck, and he's like, so measure her against a duck, and then like, she like weighed the same as a duck, so they were like, because she weighed the same as a duck, she's a witch killer. and then King Arthur was like, man, that was some really wise That was some like really wise advice right there, man.
People really have it going on.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
that's pretty
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mention the weights and stuff because, like, I don't know, within the past couple months, I've watched a few videos on like, because like when you think about weight, it's like kind of arbitrary, right? Like what you call it at least, or like how do you decide? Like, okay, so we all have a pound, right? We know what a pound is,
Mhm.
but like, how do you come up with what a pound is?
Hmm.
Like, how would you think to do that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, who originally created the idea of a pound
Is it just
versus
like
like
the
a
weight of
kilogram?
like, yeah, is it the weight of a coconut? Like, but coconuts are different sizes. So how do
Hmm.
you like a medium coconut? Is it like, is it because you can't really measure something without like having a size associated with it, or you can't weigh something without having like a size associated with it as well.
Hmm.
Which is kind of weird because you'd think like, oh, it's just the weight of something, but like the quantity or the size that thing matters in the weight of it.
Hmm.
So you can't even do one measure without another,
That's true.
which
Yeah,
is
in
kind of
order
like
to
super
accurately
weird.
measure something, you have to have an equivalent measurement that to compare it to know that
Mm-hmm.
it's balanced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you have to use like something outside of just weight to well, is that true? Maybe I'm just saying BS.
Well, like you'd have to have, because that's the idea of the scales. It's like if I'm holding up that seesaw scale, I
Mm-hmm.
got the witch and the duck here or whatever, it's like if I have, if
Yeah.
I put two objects on it, you only know the weight of object number one because you already
Mm-hmm.
know the weight of object number two.
Yeah.
Like you have to have both objects in order to understand their relationship to one another. So you'd have
Yeah,
to
you
put
can't.
something in
Yeah.
it that's like, we know this thing weighs 15
Yeah.
pounds. So I put that on
Yeah.
there.
And actually that's where I was going with this too, is like so I think you put it really nice, a good way where it's like you have to have something to compare it to in
Mhm.
order to even measure one thing, you have to have something else or some standard outside of this thing. But speaking of standards, it's actually interesting because they have um like I don't know if it's each country or each like set of alliances or whatever, but they so like the United States, for instance, has like I forget what exactly measurement it is, but it's some scientific measurement. And so they have like a ball that weighs the exact amount, and that is like the standard for all other weights that all other weights are based off of. Like
Really?
yeah. And there's also like a clock somewhere that is like the clock that everything else is based around. And so it's like everything refers back to these weights. And so if you like want to do like really scientific work or whatever, you have to like compare to like this original ball or whatever it's
Oh,
like some sort of like there's good videos on YouTube about it, but like they keep it hermetically sealed and like
all
it's like
right.
this pristine object,
Mm,
relic that
mm.
is like in a vault somewhere that
Wow.
like you base all the like this is the standard kilo or whatever, like and whatever that whatever it is. So and then based off that, then you can start to like weigh everything else, when like what they because you have to do it by atomic mass at that point. I
Mm.
think I
Okay.
might be saying nonsense, but I think you have to like you know find out the atomic mass of the thing or something, and then um, yeah, from there, then you can start to do the comparisons on everything else, and then
Mm.
basically sync it back to this original object,
That's
and then
interesting.
yeah, because without
Yeah.
that, like everybody's definition of a pound is different,
Yeah.
It's like,
Huh. Gosh, there's a
or
lot of
yeah,
interesting thoughts to go into with that. I mean, I knew that time was standardized because isn't there like a clock? I want to say it's like in Greenwich, England or something like that. I think it's in England
somewhere, yeah,
somewhere, and that's like the clock. That's like zero on the time zones, or I don't know, however it works, and then everything kind of
yeah,
wraps around from there. But
yeah, probably
um,
some sort of like atomic clock or something where it's like, I think they use like radiation to like pulses to, or crystal pulses or some radiation
interesting.
crystal pulses or something to like
Okay,
think it. It's like super precise or whatnot, but
interesting.
yeah,
But The idea that in order to measure something, you have to have like a perfect, you have to have the perfect standard that's being
Hmm.
held that everything is in comparison to. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't help but just think about heaven and earth and think about how heaven is like the perfect standard. It's like God made, like, this is the perfect place. And
Hmm.
then, earth is kind of like the fallen form of that. And so then heaven and earth, it's always like kind of this comparison. It's like, this is the place with
Mm.
perfect justice and health and all the things that God wanted the world to be like. And then you have like earth that's kind of measured against that almost.
Mm.
Gosh, that's a lot to think about. That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see like, yeah, it is interesting because I've been kind of listening to a lot about, the kind of the ultimate plan for like what God's trying to do or whatever, and it's like it is cool how there is like some sort of, because like with the weight standard, it's like people are obviously trying to match up to that standard, and like people who that want to be accurate and want to be on the ball will like try to adhere to that standard, so but then I've been reading a lot about kind of the cycle of the Bible, I guess, and like there's you have like the garden into the descent and then back up to heaven again, and it's like it's super interesting how it all comes back to like the garden,
Hmm.
and this uh basically like even the temple and stuff, it's like basically the whole story is leading back up to the return of the garden.
Hmm.
And like even in the temples or the tabernacles, it was like all garden imagery, like people always wonder about like the pomegranates and stuff, or at least I did. It's like, why is there all this like fruit and like trees and like stuff? But it's like they're literally depicting a garden,
Hmm.
again. And even in the Revelation, you have this final version of like a city with a garden,
Hmm.
and it kind of like I've heard a lot of interesting theories, but like what makes sense to me is like um, the city kind of represents like technology, I guess, in a way.
Hmm.
Um, because you have like full nature, and then like as people fall away from God and like the garden, they need more technology, So like garments would be like an example of that, where it's like this man-made implement to protect you from like nature and
Hmm.
whatnot. And so it's like this protective element, but then the final and like the city is that, you put up your walls, you put up your defenses, do your all
Hmm.
your human business
Little,
inside, I guess, for
little
lack of a
frozen
better
there.
word. Um, and so it's like that further insulates you from like nature and God and all
Hmm.
this kind of stuff. But then like in the final time, you have like this integration of like city and nature in like harmony and stuff.
Hmm.
And so that's like, because I don't think technology is inherently bad, but it has to be integrated properly. And so like I think the final version of Revelation is that kind of the image of technology and God's like perfect world combining
Hmm.
together in a weird way.
Yeah. Gosh, that's interesting.
And Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse character is there with legs.
Uh, oh man, that's so funny. Gosh, well, okay,
But
so it
yeah.
it raises a question, the idea of measurements. Just thinking about like how much do you measure your own life? That was kind of one of my thoughts from the idea
Mm.
of measuring and how that's inspiring. Do you feel like there's a lot of stuff that you measure, not just like measuring, how much water am I going to boil right now and how
I
much
was about
rice
to
do I
say I do
pour
a lot
into
of
the
cooking,
bottling? I
so
mean, there's
quite
cooking
a bit.
measurements, but I mean, what are all the other things that maybe you like measure in different categories of life? Spirituality, emotions, your health,
Money.
money, your time, like what are things that you feel like you, Paul, specifically measure a lot throughout your own day?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think huh, I don't know how to exactly to phrase it, but I would say like the sentiment is like the thing I measure probably the most is trying to not it's not morality, but like it's like trying to do the right thing, I guess, and balancing that, I guess. So it's like I'm always trying to ask myself, like, is this the right thing to be doing? Is this the right thing to be doing? Is this the right thing to be doing? And so I'm trying to like measure my, I don't even know how you'd phrase that, like my,
your direction in life, or your
yeah, maybe direction, yeah, attention, or like, yeah, because that's definitely what I like probably spend the most of my active thought on, I guess, is trying to like make sure everything's in balance in like proper proportion. And so I guess proportion is a type of measurement, right? Where like you're trying to make sure one thing's not too high and the other's not too low. So yeah, that's kind of like, yeah, I'm trying to do a lot of like balancing. And I guess when you're using it in terms of scales as well, there's, you know, scales are balancing. So for me, like a lot of that is just on a day-to-day basis is trying to make sure everything is in its proper place and balanced. And so like for me, that encompasses all areas, is, you know, as far as even like, you know, am I focused too much on one thing, or is like, and the way that it gets interesting too is like that's all a dynamic system. So it's like, you know, I think, you know, maybe one week you're working way more, and then the next week you don't work barely at all. You know, it's not consistent, but it is balanced. So it's like it just depends on like the time scale that you bring it out to. Just depends. Yeah, it depends on the time scale you're looking at. That depends on whether it's balanced or not, you know? And so I tend to look on a pretty large time scale. And so for me, like the balance might not seem as like in place if you just like looked at a day of mine or like a week of mine. But I think the farther you go out, the more you see balance. And so that's like, I'm trying to ultimately do it over my whole life. And like, obviously you don't know when you're going to die and whatnot, but like I'm trying to measure my whole life at most given times. So yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest place of measurement. But you know, as far as, you know, just time and stuff, I'm always trying to be aware of the time and the time of people around me, and I'm trying to measure like fairness, I think, is another one, like trying to make sure that, you know, not being too much of a burden, or like, you know, asking for the right amount and giving the right amount, because I think that's kind of hard to do, you know. And it's like, I know on my end it's probably even harder to receive something, you know, because it's like that tips the scales of fairness, because I probably always think I'm a little lower than I am on the giving scale or something, you know. But yeah, always leaves me feeling like I have stuff to make up for, or like to compensate for a lack, maybe. But yeah, what made you was there like a certain thought that sparked time balance or measurement for you, or was there some initial leading up thing? Or
yeah, I mean, what, you know, just I think the initial thing that inspired me by thinking about measurement is how you change things when you start measuring, you know. If you start measuring, you know, what you eat, like you keep a food journal, right? Oh, today I ate 3 cookies, you know, whatever it was. Then you start looking at it, and after you've done that for a few weeks or a month or something, you go, gosh, I really don't like what I eat. You know, I need to change my diet. I could do something different. You start measuring your, you know, time, and it's like, gosh, I watch a movie every single day. Man, what if I took those 2 hours and I did something different with it? You start measuring your money. You know,
I could make a movie.
I could make a movie if I had that much time. You know, you measure your money with a budget, and it's like, oh wow, I spent so much on this and I didn't need to do it. You know, or like I said earlier, journaling. You start measuring your thoughts and emotions and needs and things like that. And you know, I think that the more you start measuring who you are as a person, what you do, what you think, what you eat, consume, whatever, then that's where you start making changes in life. And I think it's interesting how much capacity we have in our culture today to measure things We just are obsessed with all kinds of measurements. But when it comes to
you
like
can track your steps with an app.
track your steps, you can measure your sleep. I mean, it's crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Where you can measure where you run on a trail with the trail apps. You can like record on GPS, like where your actual path was and how long it took. I mean, there's just crazy stuff you can measure. But I feel like we don't really, even though we have the capacity to measure a lot of things, I don't think that we always spend time measuring the right things. Our health, our hearts and souls, our time, our money. You know, it's like, I think that we spend a lot of time measuring secondary things, and we don't always measure like the most important things in life. And then we wonder like, oh, I don't know if I'm ever changing and like growing as a healthier person or whatever, you know, like I'm just a hypothetical person, not me, of course. But, you know, if you start measuring stuff, then it's like, you'll probably start changing, you know, just by the awareness of where you truly are at. You'll realize that you could make some simple changes and want to be different, you know?
That's what I was about to kind of touch on, because I think we talked about it in an earlier podcast for like just attention, like, because it sounds like you're talking a lot about attention as well, of like just noticing like patterns or habits leading to change and stuff. And I think we talked about kind of just giving attention, how it's like you don't even have to necessarily try even to fix something, but just giving it attention is enough to like start to make changes or like lead to the state that would make a change, you know, in a behavior. There is actually some I read this interesting study about how a study no, I'm just kidding, but basically that people who got screenings for cancer were like had a higher morbidity rate. And you would think it'd be like the exact opposite, right? Like it should like lessen your morbidity factor, but basically because like the more you got screened, like because of that, then like the body's just naturally going to have like, you know, weird lumps and weird stuff that happens over time, like, you know, suspicious tissue, all this kind of stuff.
That's the name of a band, Suspicious Tissue. Ooh, I got to remember that. I gotta start something with that name. Anyway, sorry, I derailed you. Keep going.
Kleenex company. But yeah, so like, you know, then you get this suspicious thing, and then the doctor's like, well, we got to be safe. Like, I don't want to get, you know, sued for malpractice if I don't check this out or whatever, you know, whatever it is. There's a lot of reasons why they would check it out, but, you know, maybe they're genuinely concerned about you. Anyway, so you go, you know, you have to get this biopsy done, which is like, you know, anything invasive is never good for you. I mean, usually never good for you. You know, so then, you know, you're waiting this whole time, you're stressed while you're waiting for the results of like, I might have cancer, all this kind of stuff, you know, and it's like that stress and where it puts on you. And then you're, you know, like people can have like, you know, tumors that aren't causing them any problems for years, you know, sometimes even their whole life. But then they, you know, anytime you find something, you'd have to take it out, and then, you know, maybe you get a biopsy every couple of years or something for these growths or whatever it is, you know. It's just like you know, you're increasing your factors for risk at all these stages, you know. And so then by the time they actually even could catch something that would be like deadly, it might have even spread too far, you know, between your checkups and your, you know, all this kind of stuff. So it's just like, it doesn't even, having all that data or whatever, doesn't even necessarily correlate to better health, you know, in that specific scenario and stuff. So like kind of what I was going to ask you is like, with all, you know, you're saying like, because yeah, there is like apps for sleep and for running and for steps and stuff. It's like at a certain point, is all that measurement too much, or does it get in the way of maybe being useful, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it could be that way. If you know, this, like sometimes people get so obsessed with like calorie counting, you know, that they just want to measure the amount of calories they consume with every little thing that they eat, and then how much they exercise and how much they burned calories, and they get so obsessed with it that they almost like stress themselves out, and it's like, okay, maybe you need to relax a little bit, not be so into that, you know. Or
And did 500 of your calories come from a Hershey bar or from a salad? You know.
yeah, or you know, sometimes people are measuring things like you know, personality tests, you know, measuring, you know, the deeper parts of your personality. And I think that those can be useful for people, but if you
Tune off now, Deanna.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, you know, I think personality tests are fun.
Rip them a new one.
But you have to be really robust with it, because if you hold yourself to that measurement and you make that your identity, maybe the measurement was wrong, or maybe you changed over the years. I mean, I've done personality tests and like I get a different result, you know, as time goes by. I change a little bit, and then. And I, you know, then I start to think of myself differently. Like, oh, I thought that I was this type of person, but now I'm different. Now I'm this type of person. Gosh, and maybe I do behave that way. Yes, I am like that. Yes, I will be more extroverted now. I am an extrovert.
Self-fulfilling.
You know? Exactly. And
Because of self-fulfilling prophecy.
And so that, I think that can be, you know, if you measure so obsessively that you stress yourself out, and it's more about the measurement than changing the measurement. And if you basically, self-fulfilling prophecy, you've measured something.
The measurement becomes you.
Yeah, and now you are that measurement. Like, oh, that's how much weight I weighed. Like, I am a whatever, you know? So I think that those are the ways that measurement could go wrong, potentially. So, you know, you have to have a healthy approach to how you're measuring and how much weight you put on the measurement. Weight on the measurement.
Nice.
But I think that in general, it is something that I would rather err on the side of having more measurement than less measurement, as like a general rule in a lot of areas of my life. I think I would err on that side.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, dude.
Cool. Well, maybe we can wrap it up there then.
Let's wrap it up right there, dude.
Yeah.
You know, we can be creative and measure stuff.
Yeah, imagination. That's find ways to spark your imagination.
Yeah, I'm gonna measure your sparks.
The amount of imagination I have. Well, I'll see how many pages I write, and then I'll tell you how imaginative I was feeling or not.
Yeah.
Or you can just review them. Isn't that a type of measurement?
Yeah, that's
4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna. You're looking a little bit less creative than you were last week, Paul. Down by 32%.
Hey, it's a real letdown. Send me into my spiral. Or I don't know, maybe dude, sometimes, you know, negative review will inspire somebody and they'll go out to prove all the haters wrong. Maybe that's what I need. I have supporting people around me. I need more.
Yeah, maybe you need more haters, man. Yeah. If only people hated the creative stuff you make, then maybe you would want to prove yourself. Wasn't that kind of the premise of Whiplash, you know? It's like he never told anyone that they were good enough. He always just like pushed them to go further. You know?
Yeah. And then
that movie.
Once their hands were bleeding, he was satisfied.
Yeah. That's right.
My pen hand hasn't bled yet, so I must be doing something wrong.
Doing something wrong, man. Yeah, that's right.
Not passionate enough. All right. Well, stay inspired, people, and we'll definitely catch you next week.
Yeah. Stay tuned, and you know, type into the comments on the channel and let us know what inspires you, and if you've thought deeper about any of the things that we've talked about. All those things we like hearing that kind of feedback. So everybody, stay tuned for sure.
All right, signing out from Idaho. Peace.